The medical frigate USS Mercy glided silently through the darkness of space. Its white hull reflected the distant starlight, and the red cross emblazoned on its side announced its purpose to any who saw it. Lieutenant Allison Gray stood at the view screen, watching as they approached the mining colony on Proxima Centauri's third moon. 5 minutes until touchdown, said the pilot. Allison nodded and turned to face her medical team. 20 men and women in crisp white uniforms checked their equipment one last time. They had trained for this, a mining accident with hundreds injured and infrastructure damage. Remember, Allison said, her voice calm but firm. We treat everyone equally. The miners first, then colony staff, then management. Priority goes to the most severely wounded regardless of status. The team nodded. They knew the drill. Earth had only been part of the Galactic Confederation for 5 years, but human medical teams had quickly gained respect. While many species questioned humanity's place in galactic society due to Earth's violent history, no one questioned their medical expertise. Colony in visual range, announced the pilot. Allison turned back to the view screen. The mining colony came into view, a sprawling complex of domes and tunnels built into the gray, dusty surface of the moon. Smoke rose from the largest dome, and debris scattered the landing area. Looks worse than reported, said Dr. Joe Kendrick, her second in command. His weathered face showed concern as he studied the screen. The distress call mentioned an explosion in the main processing plant, Allison replied. 200 miners trapped, at least 50 with critical injuries. The ship landed with a gentle bump. Allison's team moved with practiced efficiency, unloading medical modules and setting up a triage center just outside the landing zone. Colony security personnel rushed to meet them, faces streaked with dust and fear. "Thank God you're here," said a tall woman with a security badge reading Martinez. "It's bad. The processing plant collapsed while on full shift. We've got wounded everywhere, and our medical bay was damaged in the blast." Allison nodded. "Take us to them. We've brought enough supplies for everyone." The team followed Martinez through the colony's main thoroughfare. Injured miners sat or lay along the sides, some being tended by colony medical staff who looked overwhelmed. Allison noted burns, crush injuries, and the telltale blue lips of oxygen deprivation. "Set up treatment stations here, and there," she ordered, pointing to 3 locations. "Dr. Kendrick, take Team 2 into the collapsed section. Team 3 will convert that storage building to a surgical unit." Her people moved without question. White uniforms soon smudged with the moon's gray dust and the blood of various colors from the multi-species mining crew. Allison knelt beside a young miner with a crushed leg, administering pain medication as she assessed the injury. "You're going to be okay," she told him, her voice gentle despite the chaos around them. "We'll have you fixed up and complaining about the food in no time." The miner managed a weak smile as Allison moved to the next patient. Hours passed as they worked steadily, saving those they could. The USS Mercy contained the latest medical technology from across the galaxy, and the Human Medical Corps had modified much of it to be more effective, more portable, and simpler to use. "Lieutenant Gray," called one of her nurses. "We've stabilized the critical patients in Section 1. Allison wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dirt. "Good. Move on to..." A high-pitched whine cut through the air, familiar to any military veteran. Allison's head snapped up. "Incoming," she shouted. Just as the first explosion hit near the landing pad, the ground shook, dust and debris rained down. Allison threw herself over her patient as more explosions followed. "What's happening?" yelled Dr. Kendrick through the comlink. Allison looked up to see sleek, black ships descending from the sky. Their design was unmistakable, angular, with protruding weapon arrays and the distinctive green markings of the Krelvak. "We're under attack," she replied, her voice tight. "Krelvak warships. Get everyone you can into the tunnels." The insectoid Krelvak had been at war with parts of the Confederation for years, but they had never attacked this far into human space. More importantly, they had never targeted a clearly marked medical vessel or personnel. "This is Lieutenant Allison Gray of the Earth Medical Corps," she broadcast on all frequencies. We are a neutral medical unit treating civilian casualties. Under Galactic Convention Article 17, we request immediate cessation of hostilities in this area. The only response was another barrage of explosions, closer this time. One hit the makeshift surgical unit, sending a fireball into the sky. "They're targeting us specifically," said Martinez, crouching beside her. "The mining facility has strategic value, but they're aiming for your people." Allison watched in horror as Krelvac ground troops emerged from their landing craft. The insectoid soldiers moved with precision, their chitinous armor gleaming in the emergency lights. They fired not at the colony security forces, but at the armed, white-uniformed medical personnel. "Everyone fall back to the Mercy," Allison ordered through her comm. "Bring as many patients as you can carry." Her team fought to save as many as possible, carrying injured miners toward the ship. Allison helped. A nurse dragged 2 wounded aliens toward safety, but the Krelvac were closing in. A blast hit nearby, throwing her to the ground. Pain lanced through her side where shrapnel had torn through her uniform. She pulled herself up, limping toward where Dr. Kendrick was performing emergency surgery despite the chaos. "Joe, we have to go," she shouted. Before he could respond, a Krelvac soldier appeared behind him. Allison screamed a warning, but it was too late. The alien fired and Dr. Kendrick fell across his patient. Rage and disbelief flooded through her. This violated everything the galaxy had agreed upon. Medical personnel were protected in conflicts. Even Earth's bloody history had honored this principle for centuries. Allison dragged herself to cover behind a fallen support beam. Around her, her team was being systematically eliminated as they tried to protect their patients. The Krelvac moved with terrible purpose, executing wounded and healers alike. She activated her emergency beacon, broadcasting directly to Earth Command. "This is Lieutenant Gray. The Krelvac are attacking the mining colony on Proxima Centauri. 3. They have deliberately targeted medical personnel. The USS Mercy is under attack. We have numerous casualties. They're killing everyone, even those trying to surrender." She peered out from her hiding place and saw a larger Krelvac, clearly a commander, directing the others. It approached a wounded, human nurse who was protecting a child. "Please," the nurse begged. "We're unarmed medical staff." The Krelvac commander's mandibles clicked as it spoke, its translator making the words clear. "The humans must learn that weakness will not be tolerated. In this galaxy, your species protects the injured and sick, wasting resources on those who cannot contribute. This is why you will never survive among the stars." It raised its weapon and fired. Allison bit back a cry as she recorded everything with her comm unit. Blood soaked her uniform now, her vision growing dim. She had to get this message back to Earth. They had to know what happened here. As consciousness faded, her final thought was of the irony. The Krelvac thought humanity's compassion was weakness, not understanding it was a choice. Humanity had not always been so merciful. They had simply decided to be better. And now, Allison feared, the galaxy would see what happened when humans decided otherwise. The last thing she saw was the Krelvac commander standing over her, weapon aimed at her head. "Your species will learn," it said, "or it will perish." Then darkness claimed her. Admiral William Powell stood motionless as the recording ended. The room fell silent. 23 members of the United Earth Council sat around the oval table, their faces pale with shock or flushed with anger. Powell waited, letting the horror sink in. The recording had shown everything: the deliberate targeting of the medical team, the execution of wounded patients, and Lieutenant Allison Gray's final moments before the feed cut out. The Krelvac commander's words echoed in the chamber. "The humans must learn that weakness will not be tolerated in this galaxy." 207 medical personnel dead, Powell said finally, plus 84 patients they were treating. No survivors. Council President Maria Ortiz pressed her hands flat against the table. "What does the Galactic Confederation propose in response to this?" "Diplomatic sanctions," Powell replied, not bothering to hide his disgust. "They've issued a formal condemnation and restricted Krelvac access to Confederation trade routes." "Sanctions?" Senator Alan Foster slammed his fist down. "They murdered our medics. They violated the most basic principle of warfare recognized by every civilized species. Powell nodded. The Confederation fears escalation. The Krelvak are already at war with the Durasi. Opening another front could destabilize the entire sector. So we're expected to accept the slaughter of our people? Asked Defense Secretary Diane Cooper. No, Powell said firmly. We are not. He touched a control, and a new image appeared on the screens. A facility built into the ice of Antarctica, stark, utilitarian, and heavily guarded. Ultramax prison. Site 7, he explained. Built during the final global conflict before Earth united, it holds the worst offenders from that war. People who violated even our own rules of engagement. Dr. Ellen Martinez, Earth's representative to the Confederation, frowned. War criminals? What are you suggesting, Admiral? Operation Pandora's box, Powell answered. We release select prisoners with specific skill sets, people who understand how to fight without rules. We send them against the Krelvak. The room erupted in voices. President Ortiz raised her hand for silence. Admiral, we spent decades putting our violent past behind us, she said. We earned our place in the Confederation by proving we had moved beyond such behavior. You're suggesting we throw that away? Powell's face hardened. With respect, Madam President, our place in the Confederation means nothing if we allow our people to be slaughtered. The Krelvak believe compassion is weakness. They need to learn why humans chose compassion, not because we couldn't be monsters, but because we knew exactly what we were capable of. Dr. Martinez stood. This would send a terrible message, that humans revert to war crimes when provoked, that our civilization is just a thin veneer over barbarism. No, Powell countered. It sends the message that there are lines that must never be crossed, that attacking medical personnel won't be met with sanctions. It will be met with the full, terrible force of human warfare. He brought up images of 5 individuals, their prison photos stark and clinical. Colonel Frank Mason, court-martialed for sacrificing civilian populations to achieve military objectives. Major Samantha Rivers, chemical weapons specialist who tested experimental compounds on captured soldiers. Captain George Winters, psychological warfare expert who broke every rule on treatment of prisoners. Lieutenant Vincent Russo, demolitions, specialist who targeted civilian infrastructure to break enemy morale. And Dr. Philip Grant, developer of prohibited biological weapons. The council studied the faces in silence. These 5 understand how to wage war in ways we've forbidden ourselves, Powell continued. We give them a mission. Make the Krelvak understand the cost of what they've done. You want to unleash war criminals? Martinez asked. People we imprisoned because their actions were too horrible to forgive. Yes, Powell said simply. Because the Krelvak need to learn that humans don't avoid atrocities because we're weak. We avoid them because we're very, very good at them. Senator Foster leaned forward. What's to stop these criminals from escaping once released? Or refusing? To follow orders? Each will be paired with an oversight officer, Powell explained. Someone with the authority to terminate them if they exceed mission parameters or attempt to escape. The criminals get freedom if the mission succeeds. If they try to run, they die. President Ortiz studied Powell's face. You've already selected these oversight officers, haven't you? Powell nodded and touched another control. A new image appeared, a hospital bed with a bandaged figure connected to medical equipment. Lieutenant Allison Gray, he said quietly. Gasps filled the room. She survived? Martinez asked. Barely, Powell replied. The Krelvak left her for dead. A rescue team found her under the bodies of 3 patients she tried to protect. She's been in recovery for weeks. And she's agreed to this plan? President Ortiz asked. She volunteered to monitor Colonel Mason personally, Powell said. She wants to be there when he shows the Krelvak exactly what they've awakened. The council fell silent again, weighing the decision before them. Dr. Martinez finally spoke. If we do this, we're no better than the Krelvak. We'd be abandoning the principles that define us. Powell looked her directly in the eye. No, Doctor. We'd be reminding the galaxy why those principles matter, why we created them in the first place, not because we're incapable of breaking them, but because we know exactly what happens when we do. President Ortiz called for a vote. One by one, council members pressed buttons on their consoles. The final tally appeared on the main screen. 17 for, 6 against. Operation Pandora's Box is approved, Ortiz announced, her voice heavy. With one condition. This remains completely classified. No one outside this room knows we've authorized the use of war criminals. Powell nodded. Understood, Madam President. And Admiral, she added, as Powell turned to leave. Make sure they understand their purpose. This isn't about revenge. It's about teaching the Krelvok why humans chose to walk away from our darkest capabilities. I'll make that clear, Powell said. But I suspect the Krelvok won't appreciate the distinction. 3 days later, in a secure medical facility beneath Pentagon Complex, Powell stood beside Allison Gray's bed. Her face was scarred from the attack with burn marks along one side. A prosthetic arm replaced the one she'd lost, but her eyes held the same determination he remembered from her personnel file. They're waking them up now, he told her. Are you sure about this, Lieutenant? Monitoring Mason won't be easy. He's brilliant, but he's also completely without moral restraint. Allison's voice was raspy from healing throat injuries. They killed my team while we were trying to save lives. They need to understand why humans don't fight the way they do. She looked down at where her arm had been. Not because we can't, because we choose not to. Powell nodded. We've assigned you the stealth warship Retribution. Officially, it doesn't exist. Neither does your mission. Good, Allison said quietly. Because what we're about to do shouldn't exist either. Powell turned to leave, then paused. The Council wants this to be a measured response, just enough to make the point. Allison's eyes hardened. I'll make sure the point is very, very clear, sir. The air in Ultra Max Prison Site 7 was cold and stale. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, Warden Kate Miller walked through metal corridors that hadn't seen regular use in decades. Her breath formed clouds as she approached the central control room. Are we ready? She asked the technician. Yes, ma'am. Cryopods 1 through 5 are beginning warming cycles. Vital signs are stable. Miller nodded. She had overseen this prison for 15 years, watching over criminals so dangerous they weren't even allowed to serve their time conscious. Today, for the first time, she would wake them. Open communication to all revival chambers, she ordered. 5. Screens lit up, showing frost-covered pods slowly coming to life. Inside each, a shadowy figure began to stir as warming chemicals pumped through their systems. This is Warden Miller. You are being revived under Special Order 7729. Medical staff will assist you. When you are able to stand, you will be escorted to Briefing Room A. Any attempt to resist will result in immediate termination. In Briefing Room A, Admiral Powell and Lieutenant Gray waited. Allison sat stiffly in her chair, still adjusting to her prosthetic arm. The door opened, and the first of the war criminals walked in. Colonel Frank Mason moved with surprising grace for a man who had been frozen for nearly a decade. His eyes scanned the room immediately, assessing threats and exits. He was followed by Major Samantha Rivers, a thin woman with cold eyes, and Captain George Winters, whose face remained expressionless. Lieutenant Vincent Russo entered next, muscles tensed as if ready to fight or flee. Last came Dr. Philip Grant, blinking owlishly behind wire-rimmed glasses, looking more like a confused professor than a war criminal. Please sit, Powell said, gesturing to the chairs across from them. Mason took the center seat. The others arranged themselves around him without discussion. Even after years apart, they naturally positioned themselves in a defensive formation. Colonel Mason, I'm Admiral William Powell. This is Lieutenant Allison Gray. Mason studied Allison's scarred face and prosthetic arm. Combat injuries recent, not from our last war. Something new then. His voice was rough from disuse. Very observant, Powell said. Lieutenant Gray was the senior medical officer on the USS Mercy. A hospital ship? Rivers asked, her voice surprisingly soft. Yes. It was attacked while treating civilian miners on Proxima Centauri's third moon. The attackers deliberately targeted medical personnel. Lieutenant Gray was the only survivor. Mason's eyes narrowed. Earth has changed since we went to sleep. We're in space now, part of something bigger. The Galactic Confederation, Powell confirmed. We joined 5 years ago. Unfortunately, not every species shares our views on warfare. He activated a screen showing the Krelvak attack. The 5 prisoners watched without emotion as medical staff were executed while trying to protect patients. When it ended, Mason turned to Allison. You should have had security forces. We were a medical mission, she replied stiffly. Protected under galactic conventions. Mason snorted. Conventions only work when both sides agree to them. You learned that the hard way. Powell interrupted. The attackers are the Krelvak, an insectoid species at war with parts of the Confederation. Until now, they hadn't engaged with humans directly. Dr. Grant leaned forward. Fascinating. Insectoid physiologies often have centralized nervous systems. Have you tried targeted bioweapons? We don't do that anymore, Allison said sharply. That's why we're here, isn't it? Mason asked quietly. You need people who still know how. Powell nodded. We're offering you all a deal. Serve on this mission against the Krelvak and your sentences will be commuted. You'll be free citizens again when it's over. And if we refuse? Asked Winters. You go back in the freezer until your original sentences are complete. In your case, Captain, that's another 70 years. Mason glanced at his companions, then back to Powell. What's the catch? Each of you will be paired with an oversight officer who will ensure you don't exceed mission parameters. Lieutenant Gray will personally monitor you, Colonel. Mason studied Allison with new interest. The Angel of Mercy paired with the Demon of War. Poetic. I'm not here for poetry, Allison said coldly. I'm here to make sure you don't become a bigger monster than the ones we're fighting. Mason smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. Lieutenant, I wasn't made a monster, I was made a weapon. There's a difference. Powell stood. You'll be given command of the stealth warship Retribution. It has technology even your military never had. If you accept this mission, you leave. In 48 hours. I want to see their biology, Grant said immediately. Full xenobiological profiles. I need atmospheric data for their worlds, Rivers added. Composition, pressure, temperature ranges. Russo tapped his fingers on the table. Structural information on their buildings and ships. Materials, weak points. Winters said nothing, but his eyes gleamed with interest. Mason watched Allison. And what about you, Lieutenant? Are you prepared to watch us do what we do best? I'm prepared to stop you if you go too far, she replied. You still don't understand, Mason said. Going too far is exactly why we're being unleashed. 2 days later, the Retribution prepared for departure from Earth's secret orbital dock. The ship was unlike anything Mason had ever seen. Sleek, black, and designed to be invisible to most detection systems. On the bridge, Mason sat in the command chair with Allison standing to his right. The other war criminals manned their stations, each shadowed by their oversight officer. Pre-launch checks complete, reported the pilot, one of the few regular military personnel assigned to the mission. Take us out, Mason ordered. Stealth, systems active. As the ship slipped away from Earth, Allison watched Mason studying the tactical displays. She could almost see his mind working, formulating plans. Tell me, Lieutenant, he said quietly so only she could hear. Did your medical training include psychiatric evaluation? Yes. Why? Because you should understand something about us. We're not just criminals. We're what humanity created when it needed to win at any cost, then discarded when we became inconvenient. Allison frowned. You broke laws, violated basic human decency. We did what we were trained to do, Mason replied. Then the world changed, and suddenly we were monsters instead of heroes. He turned to face her fully. Now you need monsters again, but don't worry, when this is over you can put us back in our boxes and pretend your civilization never needed us. This isn't about revenge, Allison insisted. No? Then why choose us? Why not just send a conventional military force? Allison had no answer. Mason smiled thinly. The Krelvak think your compassion is weakness, They're about to learn why humans contained their capacity for violence, not because we couldn't unleash it, but because we knew exactly what would happen if we did. He turned back to the displays. Navigator, set course for the Krelvak home system. Major Rivers, begin formulating your chemical packages. Dr. Grant, I want your biological options by morning. Captain Winters, start psychological profiling from whatever intel we have. His voice grew harder. Let's show them what humans were before we decided to be civilized. Allison watched the Earth shrink behind them on the view screen. She touched, the scars on her face remembering her team dying around her. For a moment she felt a cold satisfaction knowing what was coming for the Krelvak. That feeling frightened her more than Mason ever could. The retribution emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Krelvak home system. The ship's stealth technology engaged immediately, rendering it invisible to conventional detection systems. On the bridge, Colonel Mason studied the tactical display showing 7 planets orbiting a yellow sun. Third planet is their homeworld, he said. Fourth and fifth have colony settlements. Their main fleet is positioned around the second planet, preparing for deployment to Confederation space. Allison stood beside him, her face grim. The Confederation doesn't know we're here, does it? No, Mason replied. If they did, they'd try to stop us. They still believe in fighting with rules. For 2 weeks, the Retribution had lurked in the system, gathering intelligence. Mason had forbidden any direct engagement, focusing instead on understanding the enemy. Now the team gathered in the war room to present their findings. Major Rivers spoke first. The Krelvak atmosphere has high concentrations of methane. Their food crops require specific fungal interactions to grow. I've developed a compound that will disrupt these interactions without harming the Krelvak directly. Starvation rather than poison, Mason nodded. Good. Captain Winters displayed complex charts of Krelvak communications. Their society functions like a modified hive mind. They maintain individual thought but share emotional states through pheromones and subsonic frequencies. I can broadcast signals that will disrupt their social cohesion, making them turn against each other, Allison noted, trying to keep the disgust from her voice. Lieutenant Russo pointed to structural models of Krelvak cities. Their buildings use a crystalline material that resonates at specific frequencies. I can target these frequencies to collapse structures without explosives. Dr. Grant went last. Their reproductive cycle depends on royal females who produce eggs. I've created a virus that doesn't kill, but renders the eggs non-viable for 3 breeding cycles. It's transmitted by air and won't affect other species. Mason looked pleased. Perfect. We begin Operation Hornet's Nest tomorrow. Hornet's Nest? Asked Captain Lee, Russo's oversight officer. When you disturb a hornet's nest, the hornets don't just attack the threat, Mason explained. They become aggressive toward everything nearby. The Krelvak will do the same. Later, Allison confronted Mason in his quarters. This isn't what the Council authorized. They wanted a targeted strike against military assets. Mason didn't look up from his tactical plans. The Council wants results without getting their hands dirty. That's not how this works. We're not here to destroy their civilization, Allison insisted. Now Mason did look up, his eyes cold. No? Then why wake us up? Your military could have bombed their fleet. You wanted something else. He stood and walked toward her. You wanted them to suffer. That's not true, Allison said, but her voice lacked conviction. Remember what their commander said while executing your medical team? The humans must learn that weakness will not be tolerated in this galaxy. We're going to teach them the same lesson. Mason returned to his desk. We're not going to kill them all, Lieutenant. We're going to make them understand what real warfare looks like, the kind humanity left behind. And then what? Allison asked. Then they'll negotiate. Not because they want to, but because they'll realize what we could do if we didn't hold back. The next day, the operation began. The Retribution deployed cloaked satellites around the Krelvak planets. River's chemical compounds rained down on crop areas, invisible and odorless. Grant's virus spread through population centers. Winter's psychological warfare broadcasts began transmitting on Krelvak frequencies. Russo's team targeted infrastructure rather than military bases, communications towers, power distribution centers, and transportation hubs. Nothing directly lethal, but everything designed to create maximum disruption. On the bridge, Mason watched the results through long-range sensors. Now we wait. It didn't take long. Within days, the Krelvak military mobilized, but with no clear enemy to fight. They turned their attention inward. Food shortages led to riots. The psychological broadcasts increased paranoia and aggression. Infrastructure failures created chaos. Their fleet is breaking formation, reported the sensor officer. Several ships appear to be returning to the homeworld against orders. Central authority is breaking down, Winters said with professional satisfaction. Their hive mind connection is turning from a strength into a weakness as panic spreads. Allison watched the unfolding chaos with mixed emotions. No direct attacks, no bombs or invasions, yet the damage was devastating. The war criminals had found the perfect balance, maximum suffering with minimum force. Sir, the communications officer called out. We're receiving a transmission from the Krelvak High Command. They're requesting communication. Mason smiled. Put them through. The main screen showed a Krelvak leader, its chitinous exoskeleton colored with the markings of high rank. Its mandibles clicked in agitation. Identify yourselves, it demanded. Your methods of warfare are unknown to us. I am Colonel Frank Mason of Earth, Mason replied calmly. We're responding to your attack on our medical vessel. The Krelvak's compound eyes widened slightly. The hospital ship? That was a minor border incident. This response is disproportionate. Mason's voice hardened. You called our compassion weakness. We're showing you why it was a choice. We request immediate cessation of these attacks, the Krelvak leader said. We offer reparations for the medical ship. Not good enough, Mason replied. I want unconditional surrender, and the officer who ordered the attack on our medics. Krelvak's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Allison recognized as agitation. This violates all conventions of warfare. Yes, Mason agreed. Just like attacking medical personnel does. The difference is, we're better at it. He cut the transmission and turned to his team. They're not desperate enough yet. Major Rivers, deploy the second phase chemicals. Dr. Grant, release the variant that affects their sensory perception. Lieutenant Russo, target their water purification systems. Allison stepped forward. Colonel, they're offering to negotiate. They're offering to make this stop. Mason corrected her. That's not the same thing. They need to understand that attacking those who heal is beyond forgiveness. For the next 3 days, the Retribution continued its campaign. The Krelvak homeworld descended further into chaos. Their military struggled to maintain order while fighting an enemy they couldn't see or counter. Finally, the Krelvak High Command transmitted again. This time, their leader's posture showed clear submission. We surrender, it said simply. We request terms. Mason looked at Allison. Lieutenant Gray lost her team to your barbarism. She'll decide the terms. Allison stepped forward, surprised. She looked at the alien leader, remembering her friends dying while trying to save lives. She had joined this mission seeking justice, perhaps even revenge. Now faced with a broken enemy, she felt only hollow sadness. Bring us the commander who ordered the attack on our medical ship, she said firmly. And prepare your leaders to learn about human medical ethics. Your first lesson will be why we protect those who heal, even in war. The Krelvak leader's compound eyes blinked in what might have been confusion. You would teach us? After what we did? Yes, Allison said. That's the point of all this. Not just punishment, but education. You're about to learn the most important lesson about humans. Which is, Mason answered before Allison could, that our civilization isn't built on weakness. It's built on restraining strengths that could destroy worlds. 1 month after the surrender, Allison stood in a large meeting chamber on the Krelvak homeworld. The room had been modified to accommodate human visitors, with adjusted gravity and atmospheric filters. At the center stood the Krelvak commander, who had ordered the attack on the medical ship. Its once proud posture was now submissive, mandibles held close to its body in what their cultural experts identified as shame. "This is the one," a senior Krelvac official confirmed. "Commander, Frekcha of the 4th Battle Group." Allison approached the commander, studying the alien who had caused so much pain. Around her stood Mason and the other war criminals, along with Admiral Powell, who had arrived 3 days earlier to finalize the peace treaty. "You said humans were weak for protecting our injured," Allison said, her voice steady. "For wasting resources on those who could not contribute." The Krelvac's translator converted her words. Commander Vrekcha's compound eyes fixed on her face. "I was wrong," it replied. "Your response has shown us the error in our understanding. Not just our response," Mason interjected. "Our restraint. We could have destroyed your civilization. Instead, we showed you precisely how vulnerable you are." Admiral Powell stepped forward. "The treaty is prepared. The terms are non-negotiable but fair." The Krelvac High Counselor, their equivalent of a head of state, clicked its mandibles. "We have reviewed the terms. There is one aspect we do not understand." "Which part?" Powell asked. "You demand that we establish our own medical corps and honor all galactic conventions on treatment of non-combatants. You would have us heal our enemies?" "Yes," Allison said firmly. "That's the most important part." The High Counselor's antennae twitched in confusion. "After what we did to your healers, you wish us to become healers ourselves?" "That's exactly right," Allison replied. "Because that's what separates civilization from barbarism. Not weakness, but choice." Later, in the Earth Embassy, the team gathered in a private room. Admiral Powell looked at each of the war criminals in turn. "The Council has reviewed your service," he announced. "Your sentences have been commuted as promised. You'll be designated as military advisors under supervision, not returned to cryo prison." Major Rivers nodded. "Generous of them." "Don't mistake it for generosity," Powell replied. "The truth is, the Confederation is terrified of what you accomplished. A non-lethal campaign that brought an entire species to its knees in under a month." Mason smiled thinly. "And now they want to keep us where they can see us." "Precisely," Powell confirmed. "You'll work with our defense teams to prepare countermeasures against similar tactics, just in case someone else gets the same ideas." After Powell left, Mason found Allison on a balcony overlooking the alien city. The strange architecture of the Krelvac buildings glittered in the light of their sun. "Not what you expected when you volunteered for this mission?" he asked. Allison shook her head. "I thought I wanted revenge. I thought I wanted them to suffer. And now? Now I understand something I didn't before," she said quietly. "Why we locked you away instead of executing you." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Do tell." "Because even the worst of humanity is still human," she replied. "Still capable of change. Just like the Krelvac." Mason leaned against the railing. "A pretty thought. But people like me don't change, Lieutenant. We're just aimed in different directions." "I don't believe that," Allison said. "You could have destroyed them completely. You didn't. That wasn't the mission. The mission was to make them pay. You chose to make them understand instead." Mason was silent for a long moment. "Perhaps we all learned something then." 1 year later, Allison returned to the Krelvac homeworld. This time, she arrived on a medical ship, the newly commissioned USS Forgiveness. With her came a team of human doctors and nurses to train the first class of Krelvac medical personnel. In a large hall converted to a teaching hospital, Allison watched as Krelvac students carefully practiced emergency medical procedures. Their naturally dexterous limbs made them excellent surgeons once properly trained. "They are learning quickly," said Vrekcha, the former military commander now serving as liaison to the medical program. Its translator conveyed a tone of pride. "Yes," Allison agreed. "They have natural talents for healing. We never considered this path before," Vrekcha admitted. "In our history, those too injured to fight were abandoned. We saw only weakness in caring for them. And now? Now we understand. Strength comes in many forms. Compassion requires greater courage than abandonment." Across the galaxy, on Earth, Mason sat in a secure briefing room. He and the other former war criminals had spent the year developing defensive protocols for human colonies. Today they were meeting with Confederation representatives for the first time. "Your tactics against the Krelvak were effective but disturbing," said the Dorasi ambassador, its tentacles rippling with emotion. "Many in the Confederation question whether humans should have such capabilities." Mason leaned forward. "Every species in this room has the capacity for both creation and destruction. Humans are simply honest about it." "What do you mean?" asked another representative. "We keep our darkest capabilities locked away, but we acknowledge they exist," Mason explained. "We don't pretend we're incapable of atrocity. We choose every day not to commit them. That's the difference." The Dorasi ambassador's color shifted to a deeper blue. "A troubling philosophy, but an effective one," Mason replied. "The Krelvak now understand that attacking medical personnel doesn't reveal weakness in their enemy. It unlocks something far worse." As the meeting ended, Mason found Admiral Powell waiting outside. "How did it go?" Powell asked. "As expected. They're afraid of us now." Powell frowned. "That wasn't the goal." "It wasn't the stated goal," Mason corrected. "But it's not a bad outcome. Fear can be useful. Fear can also lead to preemptive action," Powell warned. Mason shook his head. "Not if it's balanced with respect. They fear what we could do, but respect what we choose not to do. That's the foundation of any lasting peace." On the Krelvak homeworld, a ceremony was underway. The first graduates of the medical training program received their insignia, a symbol combining the human medical cross with Krelvak script. Allison, now Commander Gray, presented the final insignia to Rekcha. "From today, you're no longer just warriors," she told the assembled Krelvak. "You're healers, protectors of life. It's a higher calling than taking life could ever be." As the ceremony concluded, a memorial was unveiled in the central plaza. It honored both the human medical personnel who died in the attack and the Krelvak civilians affected by Earth's response. Its inscription, written in both human and Krelvak languages, read, "We honor those who heal because we remember what it means to destroy." Allison touched the scarred side of her face as she read the words. The pain would always be with her, but now it served a purpose. It reminded her, and everyone who saw it, of the choice that defined true civilization, not the absence of darkness but the deliberate embrace of light.